Have you ever wondered how hundreds of barrels of Canadian whiskey could seep into United States territory through the Peace Bridge between Canada and the United States in 1925? Customs Inspector Robert Harrison was about to discover one of the biggest border corruptions in American history when he went to this bridge for a routine inspection. So how could this filth, big enough to risk a man's life, remain hidden for so long?
My name is Robert Harrison. My friends call me Bob, my enemies call me Inspector. As I walked towards the Peace Bridge customs gate on that cold March day in 1925, I had no idea I was about to embark on the most dangerous adventure of my life. The wet snow of Buffalo City was crunching under my feet. The Peace Bridge, stretching over the Niagara River, looked like a ghost ship in the morning fog. The customs building on the American side of the bridge was a concrete box containing every shade of gray. The United States flag on it was flapping helplessly in the fierce wind. The instruction I received from Washington was simple: routine inspection at Peace Bridge Customs Gate. However, in the last 6 months, there had been abnormal increases in the amount of commercial goods passing through this border gate. The amounts of industrial alcohol and medical supplies imported from Canada to the United States had exceeded reasonable limits. During the Prohibition era, this situation was suspicious to say the least. As I approached the customs building, I noticed the tension on the faces of the truck drivers waiting at the gate. These people were not ordinary merchants. I recognized that typical smuggler look in their eyes, that look of constantly scanning the surroundings, as if they would startle at every sound. The slight smell of whiskey coming from behind their trucks could be felt even in the cold air. When I stepped inside the building, Customs Officer Michael O'Sullivan greeted me. This man of Irish origin in his 40s gave the impression of a sympathetic civil servant at first sight. His red hair was neatly combed, his uniform was pressed, and he had a sincere smile on his face. However, I did not delay in noticing that his hands were trembling slightly and his eyes were constantly sizing me up. O'Sullivan gave me a tour around the offices. Customs documents were neatly filed. Everything was in its place. I thought maybe I was being too suspicious. Maybe my superiors in Washington had become paranoid. However, the incident I experienced during the lunch break changed everything. While eating at the small restaurant behind the customs building, I saw a truck convoy coming from the Canadian side through the window. 5 large trucks were crossing the bridge with much heavier loads than normal. What was surprising was that these trucks did not stop at all when passing through customs control. As if they were invisible people, they were entering United States territory directly. No officer was stopping them. Curious, I left the restaurant and returned to the customs building. I could not find O'Sullivan. When I asked his secretary, she said he had gone to an important meeting. During this time, I had the opportunity to examine the customs records. There was no transit record of any of those 5 trucks in the records, as if they had never existed. As evening hours approached, I began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. In this quiet corner of Buffalo City, a big game was being played at one of the most tightly guarded borders of the United States, and I had unknowingly fallen right into the middle of this game. When I arrived at the building early the next morning, I caught the opportunity to examine the documents on O'Sullivan's desk. I found a notebook containing the addresses of Buffalo's famous speak-easies and weekly whiskey order quantities. The amounts were incredible. Just the secret bars on Elmwood Avenue alone were consuming hundreds of barrels of Canadian whiskey per month. At that moment, I heard O'Sullivan's voice from behind me. As he approached me, that sincere smile was no longer on his face. It had been replaced by a cold expression. He asked me what I was doing with the documents. I told him I was conducting a routine inspection. However, I knew my voice did not sound very convincing. O'Sullivan told me the truth. For the last 2 years, an average of 20 trucks of Canadian whiskey had been passing through Peace Bridge daily. Behind this business was a professional smuggler named Tommy the Bridge McKenzie. McKenzie was a tough man in his mid-30s who had grown up on the streets of Detroit after the war. He was smuggling premium whiskey loads he obtained from Canada's famous Hiram Walker distillery into the United States with fake documents. For each truck, customs officers were taking $50 in bribes per truck. At that time, this was equivalent to half a month's salary of an officer. McKenzie's system was flawless. The whiskeys he received from his partners on the Canadian side were loaded into specially prepared double-bottomed trucks. The official documents of the trucks stated agricultural machinery parts or canned food supplies. Moreover, McKenzie changed the route before each shipment, sometimes using the Windsor-Detroit crossing, sometimes the Peace Bridge. This way, he did not arouse suspicion anywhere. As O'Sullivan spoke, there was both fear and regret in his voice. He said McKenzie's men were dangerous people who showed no mercy to those who opposed them. Italian families living in the eastern parts of Buffalo were part of McKenzie's whiskey distribution network. These families, who had been doing legitimate business before Prohibition, were forced to join the underground economy to survive after the ban. According to what O'Sullivan told me, this system worked so perfectly that even the FBI was not suspicious. The trucks would come at midnight and be distributed to various points in Buffalo along predetermined routes. The first stop would usually be the large warehouse on Elmwood Avenue. This warehouse would do legitimate furniture trade during the day, while at night it would become a secret whiskey distribution center. From here, whiskey barrels would be transferred to smaller trucks and sent to the Purple Gang in Detroit, Al Capone's men in Chicago, and various speak-easies in New York. Each barrel would be sold at twice the price when it left Buffalo. During the Prohibition era, government salaries were very low, while living costs were constantly rising. Coal prices had doubled in Buffalo, house rents had increased by 50%. In industrial cities like Buffalo, while the smoke from steel factories polluted the air, workers' wages remained the same. Living honestly was almost impossible. O'Sullivan's small house on Elmwood Avenue was a wooden structure with peeling paint that was difficult to heat even in winter. This situation was not unique to O'Sullivan. Hundreds of customs officers working along the border were experiencing similar difficulties. O'Sullivan's story had deeply affected me, but my duty was clear. The next morning, I contacted Detective Frank Morrison at the Buffalo FBI office. Morrison was an experienced agent who had joined the FBI after returning from World War I. When I told him the situation, he was not very surprised. He said similar cases were happening at all border gates. Morrison and I made a plan. We would wait for McKenzie's next shipment, follow the trucks, and catch both the smugglers and the bribery officers at the same time. The plan was risky because McKenzie was known to have armed men. That Friday night was the last week of March. There was a thick layer of fog over the Niagara River, as if nature itself wanted to hide what would happen that night. The lights of Buffalo City created a ghostly image in the fog. Towards midnight, the truck convoy we were waiting for appeared from the Canadian side. 6 large trucks were making the bridge tremble slightly as they pressed on the metal floor of the bridge with their heavy loads. The headlights of the trucks created yellow light beams in the fog. Each truck's driver looked experienced. These were people who had done this job many times. Morrison and I were watching everything from our predetermined observation point. From behind a construction site on the American side of the bridge, we had a camera and sound recording device. I could feel my heart beating fast. If this operation failed, McKenzie's network would become even stronger. When the trucks approached the customs gate, O'Sullivan and 2 of his friends came out. Without any control, they let the trucks pass into United States territory. We had photographed this moment and recorded it. Now we had concrete evidence in our hands. We started following the trucks. Moving towards the eastern parts of Buffalo, they stopped in front of a large warehouse on Main Street. This warehouse was apparently a legitimate furniture store, but no one would transport furniture at midnight. McKenzie and his men began unloading whiskey barrels from the trucks. The barrels had the logos of Canada's famous Hiram Walker distillery on them. This was the mark of premium Canadian whiskey. Each barrel contained about 40 gallons of whiskey and would be served in Buffalo's most exclusive speak-easies. McKenzie had 4 men with him. All were armed and worked with professional movements. At this time, Morrison gave the signal and the surrounding FBI agents took action. Agents waiting at both ends of Main Street began to surround the warehouse. The operation had begun. However, McKenzie had understood the situation. He drew his gun and tried to escape. While running towards the river, FBI agents told him to stop, but he continued to escape. At the end of Main Street, he tried to hide among the old barn structures near the river. However, Morrison and other agents had surrounded him. McKenzie decided to resist with his gun instead of surrendering. In the ensuing clash, this experienced smuggler lost his life. His men surrendered. During this time, O'Sullivan and other bribery officers were also arrested at the customs building. After the operation, illegal alcohol traffic passing through Peace Bridge Customs Gate completely stopped. O'Sullivan and his friends went to court. O'Sullivan received a 3-year prison sentence, but was released in 2 years for good behavior. Other officers received similar sentences. This incident had been a very important experience for me. I had closely seen the contradictions that the Prohibition era created in the United States. While alcohol was banned on one hand, on the other hand, this ban had created a large underground economy. Ordinary people were forced to get involved in illegal business to survive. When I visited O'Sullivan in prison, he expressed his regret to me. He said he actually had no bad intentions, he just made wrong decisions to support his family. These words made me think about the fine line between justice and mercy. McKenzie's death had disturbed me for a long time. This man was also actually someone who was trying to take advantage of the opportunities created by Prohibition. Of course, what he was doing was illegal, but millions of Americans continued to consume alcohol during that period. McKenzie was just trying to meet this demand. After this operation, I made significant progress in my career. My superiors in Washington congratulated me, and I began to take part in bigger cases. A few months later, I worked as a consultant in Al Capone operations in Chicago. The Peace Bridge case led to a federal review of border security protocols. New security measures were taken at all United States-Canada border gates, and customs officers' salaries were increased. But the Peace Bridge incident always remained in my mind. This incident taught me that the Prohibition era was not just a legal regulation, but also part of a social change. Years later, when Prohibition was abolished in 1933, Peace Bridge reopened to normal commercial crossings. Ironically, the whiskeys that McKenzie had smuggled began to pass through the same route legally. After O'Sullivan was released from prison, he moved to Cleveland with his family and continued his life as an ordinary employee at a bank there. He would visit me once a year. He would tell me that his children had grown up and his wife's health had improved. Morrison continued to rise in his FBI career, worked in a special unit that tracked Nazi spies during World War II in the 1940s, and signed very successful operations until his retirement. He would also visit me from time to time, and we would remember the old days.
The Peace Bridge Customs corruption case reveals the complex situation that the Prohibition era created in the United States. This incident shows how legal regulations can produce unexpected results when they conflict with social realities. The tension between ordinary people's struggle for survival and their legal obligations continues to be experienced in similar ways today. This story contains universal themes that provoke thought on issues of justice, mercy, and social change.